What's going on with my friends in YouTube land? I'm sitting here charging the RV a little bit. I was going to talk a little bit about. I guess this would be part 3 maybe, because part 1 was, I was like saying well, I'm uploading part 2 now. It's one of those days. Hell, this would be part 3, because I'm going to talk about electrical. But I'm just sitting here thinking a little bit, man. I was sitting here seeing a guy just pull like right up on the RV here, like he was about to run into me, and I think he was just reading the sign that's, excuse me, the camera fell. I think he was just reading the sign on the window. It just says, you know, under video surveillance, you know, everyone knows where this vehicle's at, anybody, you know, that kind of thing. But the only thing I put on there was my number in case someone needed to call me if I had to move it. But anyway, I was just thinking about some things like, I'm betting after all this craziness with Corona, this whole COVID-19 thing, I'm betting, it already is, but I'm betting there's going to be a big surge in RV sales. I think it's going to be a big surge in RV sales. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. There already is, though. The RV industry has gotten crazy. I mean, it really has. And a lot of people are learning about how to build their own out of these, just like I've done. There's a lot of people out there that have done it. But hang on one second. Get off my screen. There was an alert on my screen. I don't know if you saw that, but anyway, it's just a lot of people doing this. But also was thinking earlier on my way here that I couldn't do jail time. There ain't no way. And you probably wonder, where the hell that thought come from, Chris? I was thinking about being cooped up in the house all the time, this whole quarantine thing. I guess we're fortunate we can at least go outside and walk, maybe go for a drive, and that helps. But the cooped up in your house and can't leave for 2 or 3 weeks made me thinking, hell no, I couldn't do it. I don't know how these people can do it. I'd lose my mind. I'm just going to make sure that I never end up in a situation having to do that. Never. We don't want to do that. So, nix that thought. Anyway, moving forward here, I want to talk about electricity in the van. I want to try to break down the electrical components. I'm going to post some pictures throughout this. It kind of shows images of each electrical component that I have. My battery, my inverter, and some of the things that I purchased. All my electrical except some, like I think I said this the other day, all of my electrical except crimps and small ring connectors, ring terminals, my bad, small ring terminals and small crimps that I got at Lowe's, as well as some 4-gauge wire ring terminals. I got those at the electrical supply place here in the Charleston, South Carolina area. Everything else came from Amazon. I got my battery from Amazon, my inverter, all of my bus bars, my fuse blocks, and my wiring. So we'll break that down. So first and foremost here, what you need to know is if you don't know anything about electricity or how to hook this stuff up, get help. Be very careful. Do not do any of that if you don't know what you're doing. And in fact, I got a little nervous this morning. I fell into a situation where I, for the first time, went to use my inverter for something other than the vacuum. It was my water kettle, and it pulls 1,500 watts, and it tripped the breaker. And I was like, it's not even half of what that inverter can do. So I started thinking, you know, do I have a big enough breaker? Is it the breaker? What's going on? Do I have a bad inverter? So I sent a message, actually it was a comment on one of his posts on Facebook, and this is a channel you should follow if you know a lot about solar. It's a guy named Will Prowse. Will Prowse. Will is that kid's a solar genius. He's written a book about it. There's a lot of good resources on his webpage. Go look him up on YouTube and follow him. All his information is there. It's P-R-O-W-S-E, first name Will Prowse. Follow him. I was amazed that he commented back so quickly, and he said, I think you may have a cheap Chinese breaker. Check that. I showed him a picture of what I use, and he said, that breaker is fine, but don't use breakers. Use ANL fuses. I think you'll be better. I think they'll handle that a lot better. So even with everything I knew, I learned something, because my thought process is I would rather use breakers because I just don't want to change fuses. And he was like, you know, you probably could get some Bussman breakers or something to be fine, but I would just use the ANL fuse. So I got on Amazon and I ordered some, and I actually got the 400 amp because I just wasn't sure. I was reading charts, and something I missed about, and this is a lot of details about this you got to know, is that with 4-gauge cable and pulling a battery current of 400 amps and then drawing anything over, it had it for 3,000 watts, 400 amp of a fuse. So I'm just going to go with the 400 amp and, you know, and go with that. You know, I know what to look for when I hook it up and run it, and that's, you know, another detail. So, but like I say, just make sure you know what you're doing, because there's going to be things coming. It's small things that cause these problems, but it's also small things that can get you in trouble, like not finding a proper ground and such. So, be it that it may. When I ordered my electrical, I knew what I wanted to run. I wanted to be able to run my microwave. I wanted to be able to run a induction cooktop if I wanted to. Not for an hour or two at a time, but, you know, a few minutes at a time. You know, you're boiling something or heating stuff up or cooking something real quick. Microwave's the same way. I think average use time, 2 or 3 minutes on a microwave, nothing major. Water kettle, most importantly. Now, I could have really just run that water kettle with my Energy Apex. That thing handled it very well. And if I didn't care about the induction cooktop or anything heavier, I probably would have just gotten a smaller inverter. Just been done with it. So, but I ordered the battery, which is one 200 amp hour Ames lithium-ion battery. Ames Solar is a very well-respected, trusted company in solar, as well as Renogy, Energy, where I have my Apex, Relion, Battleborn, Victron. These companies are really good. It's just about, you know, picking the company you want to do and, you know, how much money you want to pay. There's other companies out there that are very trusted too. I'm just kind of listing some off the top of my head. But it depends on what you want to run. If you don't want to run that much power, listen, my all-in-one Energy Apex would be ideal for you. And I'm going to do a video on that again, a really good review, and really show you what that thing can do in a simple form of van life. And there are guys doing that. You know, it'll power your lights. If you get through at least 300 watts of solar on the roof and run it into that Apex, it'll keep that thing charged for you every day. And you really would do well with it. That thing ran my CPAP in the RV here before I got that set up. It ran charging my devices, a lot of things. And since I've been in my van now, I haven't used it as much, but I will use it, I guarantee you. There'll be a time that it'll be used. You don't even worry about that. And if anything, it's a good backup source. I'll talk further about that, what comes with it later. But like I say, it's up to you what you want to do. Another company is Jackery. These Jackery portable solar batteries. Sorry, my damn phone again. These Jackery portable batteries, I'm going to talk about that. I've got their 240. I love that little thing, but they've got a 1000. It just came out. It has a 1000 watt inverter in it, and it's pretty cool, man. It really is. And where Jackery's going to be a game changer, if they can make something in that size, it's got a 2000 watt inverter and a couple hundred amp hours of battery, that's a game changer in with solar power and power for RVs. I mean to tell you, that's something I probably would have gone with besides doing what I'm doing now. Really cool. They're a great company. I'll talk about that as well, but you'll see pictures that I posted that I have a lot of these things as I'm going through. But the wiring, first and foremost, that I bought for this was marine grade wiring. I got 4 conductor marine grade wiring, and there's a reason why. Number one, if something goes down in the connection in the middle of the wire, you've got spares. Number two, you've got spares if you want to add dimmers, if you want to add other devices. You've got options in the wall. You don't have to worry about if there's no more wires. You've got 2 pairs of wire in that wall, negative and positive, that you can do. It comes red, black, blue, and yellow. I just was kind of thinking, well, if I'm going to do it, I might as well do it right. So I've got 150 yards of that. I think it was, or maybe it was 150 feet. It's a whole box of it. I only think I've used half of it. It's marine grade, which they call it speaker or audio wire. Same thing, it's used in boats because of the movement in a lot of RVs. So you want braided marine grade wire. You don't want rigid wire in these RVs for a lot of reasons. You want it to be able to bounce and move freely, but you also don't want something rubbing it where it rubs it bare and shorts into something and then you start a fire. You don't want to do any of that, because 12 volt can wreak havoc too. It's not just AC, it's not, you know, alternating current that'll do it as well. So that's the wiring I got. As for the lighting, I got all my lighting on Amazon. I've got, in fact, in my RV, I'll show you right now, the dream lighting you saw in my RV. Where are you at? There they are. That's the dream lighting. There we go. Those exact same lights I got on Amazon. Got them for $35 for the pair. You can imagine what little Winnebago pays for these. The lighting, see these little RV puck lights? Where are you? There you go. Those right there. I bought 6 of them. It was about 40 or 50 bucks for about 6 of them. The different manufacturers, different types. 50 bucks. That's it. There's your lighting right there. Plus I bought about $35 of those little battery powered pucks with a remote that dim. I've got all kinds of lighting in there. I mean, you've got options. I think Clancy thought I was crazy on that deal too. He goes, why do you need all this lighting? I said, well, lighting gives you options. You want that. And it's all about choice. It's all up to you what you want to do. It's not that expensive. Really, it isn't. My Max Air fan, I bought it on Amazon. That's, speaking of that, I'll talk about that later, but that Max Air fan is worth the money, folks. I've talked about it before. Is that I've got the remote with it. It has 10 speeds. It pulls air in and it pulls air out. Important that you'll need to know is you need some windows for ventilation when it's pulling it out. You don't want to do an exhaust fan pulling all that. It can cause a lot of problems you don't need. So, but the lights and the wiring, Amazon, you know, that wiring, I'll have to post a link. If you have a question what I paid for it, it wasn't much. I don't even think it was $100 for that wiring, to be honest. I got my 4-gauge cabling from going from my alternator charging, connectors for my ground, all that 4-gauge cable. I got that on Amazon by the roll. I got a pack of black and white, and I think it was 40 feet. I'll have to look at that again. But my bus bars, the bus bars are your positive and your negative, your ground bus bar and your hot, that come from the battery to them for power distribution. You want to get good sized bus bars will handle your 3/8 ring terminals for 4-gauge cable. You don't want the small ones. You want ones that give you options, because it also has little tiny ones where you put small ring terminals for 10-gauge wire. You want to put that on there. So I got wire by the roll, which was about 10 gauge. 10 to 12 gauge is the difference for small to fused panel distribution. I got it by the roll, one black and one red, so there were times I needed to run that. You need a roll each of that. I've got 2 fuse bars, which I've showed the video of. It's you can, I think Blue Sea makes a couple that are really good. There's other company, the one that I got worked fine. You're going to need a good fuse distribution panel. You want to distribute your 12 volt evenly and put fuses according to where everything goes. You want to get that done. Got that on Amazon. Those, I got a couple of those. They were probably 15 bucks a piece maybe. This stuff isn't expensive. The biggest expense of my electrical is my inverter and my battery. I can tell you right now, the inverter and the battery. It wasn't the wiring. It wasn't all the little crimps. It wasn't everything. So crimps and these little tiny ring terminals, you want to get the 10 to 14 gauge type crimps and ring terminals, the yellow and the blue. You want to get some of those. You want to get twist crimps, the yellows. Yellow from Lowe's, you can get them that you twist AC wires with. Get you some electrical tape. There's another thing. I did some things with heat shrink tubing. My 4-gauge cable, for instance, I used heat shrink. It was a lot easier for that over the edges when I did that. And I will probably, in fact, I'll probably talk here in a second how I did that. But heat shrink is probably important on that. But really, guys, electrical tape is fine. That's the original heat shrink. You can use electrical tape on a lot of that stuff. Don't let anybody tell you you can't. If somebody's meticulously neat and wants to do everything heat shrink, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with either one you choose. I've seen some of these wiring configurations that were super neat and just OCD perfect, and you see some that were horrible, and then you see mine, kind of middle of the road. I mean, the only thing I think I'd left to do is just some of that wiring you see is I'm going to bundle it together with cable ties and neaten it up a little bit. It's not that big a deal. Everything's wire tied to the frame and out of the way, you can't see it. It's very neat. A few wires running behind the cabinets because I didn't want to put them behind the wall. So that indeed. So ring terminals for the 4-gauge cable. You don't need a ring terminal tool. I just used a hammer. You get ring terminal, a hammer, and some good concrete. Just tap it, and then roll the heat shrink over it, and heat it up and roll it over. And I think I did a video showing me do that. If not, got a question, let me know. I'll be glad to do it. So, all in all, that electrical is not crazy intricate. There's a few other things you're going to need. You're going to need a good master switch, on and off switch from the battery to the inverter. You need a breaker from the battery to the inverter. Actually, let's back up, correct ourselves. I put a breaker on. You need to go ahead and go with the A&L fuses. You want them 4-gauge, and you want to get a holder for that A&L that's 4-gauge, because you're running 4-gauge cable from that battery to that inverter. So you want to get a 4-gauge grade A&L fuse and holder, and have some spare fuses. Depending on the size of your inverter is the size fuse to use. I'm going to go with the 400 on this 3500 watt inverter, but I think there's a chart out there. I think it's the NEC chart. There's charts. Just Google it, how to size fuses for batteries and inverters. And it'll tell you the gauge cable. It'll tell you the size fuse to use recommended on each, between how much you're pulling from the battery and how much the inverter is pulling current out. So again, this is something you need to either find somebody who knows what they're doing on this or get some help on that deal if you don't know. Just as I got help on a lot of these cuts when I built this stuff for the walls and the ceiling, you know, thank God I knew at least something about the electricity. So there's a lot of different wiring diagrams out there. You can make it as complicated as or as simple as you want. I did it where I had enough DC distribution, and like I say, you can go the all-in-one or you can do what I did. I have both. Next on the list I did is I've got a bunch of cigarette lighter plugs. You can get them. They're about 14 feet long, maybe longer. They have the ring terminals already on them, a fuse built in it, inline. It's a cigarette lighter plug all to one. Now, I will tell you on those fuse bus bar, those fuse blocks, those ring terminals won't fit on there, so you have to cut the end and put smaller ring terminals on them, and it's okay. It'll be fine. You have the choice of putting the fuse in line as well as the fuse on the fuse block, or just cutting that whole fuse block and cable off, saving it, and just terminating to the fuse block. I kind of did both. Just one from the cigarette lighter plug on the front of the van that I wired. I wired a cigarette lighter male plug on to go to charge my Apex. I kept the fuse, inline fuse on there, because there's a fuse under the hood with the van, but there's an inline on that to my Apex that can protect it, as well as a 15 amp. So, but I think I wired, let's say 1, 2, 3 or 4 of those I wired. Then I got an extra 2-port cigarette lighter socket on the back by my bed to charge devices with. So I had 4 of them, because my CPAP was one at my desk, one for the fan in the back, and one for the Apex. So I had 4 of them. So you get as many as you want. You don't have to get that many to do that. So I wired some of those off the fuse panel, and I think I had a few ports left on one panel. I also, the second fuse block that you see is for the Energy Apex. It's a spare, it's sitting there. I can run devices off that Apex straight to that block, and if I want to run things on that, I can run lines to charge devices for the Apex. If I don't, I could take that fuse block and just go positive to positive, negative to negative, and daisy chain it for more 12-volt connections. So you have options there. You can do this stuff. Always have options. Just be careful how you're doing it. You don't want to spread yourself too thin. So I'm going to pretty much break down like my battery cost. That Ames, I paid $1,500 for that 200 amp hour battery, which is $500 less than it has been. Usually it's about $1,000 for every 100 amp hours of lithium ion battery that you buy. I got a deal on that. And the cool thing was, if 200 amp hours wasn't enough for $1,500, I could go and get another 400 amp hours for $3,000. I was originally, and I talked about in earlier videos, going to get a 300 amp hour battery from another company. It was going to be about $3 grand, and I started reading up about the company, and I just was not, I didn't feel too good about it, and I didn't go with it. So with the cost of the Ames, I can get 400 amp hours, another 100 amp hours for the same cost that I was going to get the 300 amp hour battery. So there's $1,500 for the battery. The inverter, Ames has something that's about 3,000 watts. It's about $900 and something dollars. This is a 3,500 watt. I only paid $300 and something dollars for the inverter. You can't beat that. It's on Amazon. It's ECECOA or something. It's a Chinese company. Rave reviews on Amazon. You know, not perfect, but they're between 4 and 5 star reviews, which is ideal for me. Hoping that fuse fixes my problem. It's not an inverter problem, because trying to get in touch with that company is going to be tough. So we'll figure that out when we cross that bridge. Not a big problem. But anyway, not even $2,000 for the battery and the inverter, plus all my switches, my lights and everything. I'm going to pretty much call it at about all electrical, minus the max air fan, not even $2,500. So if you put the max air fan on it, all my electricity, including lights, switches, and max air fan, was about $2,700. Not a bad deal. Another thing is your switches, your wall switches. This choice on what do you want to do on these wall switches. I got, and I flashed a picture or a video of it. I'm pretty sure it was a picture of the little square rocker switches. They're RV switches. You find them in RVs. Simple switch. I got 2 of them, one for my water pump and one for the wall. I originally was going to wire every 2 lights on a switch for 3, and I just didn't want to do that. There was no need in it. I had several options for lights, so by my bed, the main switch was fine with me, because coming in the van, I had 2 or 3 different options of lights. I had one that's on the wall in the vehicle that comes on. I had the bright LED switch outside, and something like a little puck tap light on the counter on the cabinet. So no worries on that. I got all the lighting I need. Everything I could possibly want on that deal. The benefit of that tap lighting that's battery powered that I have extra is if you don't want to use your battery bank and you're boondocking somewhere, you've got that. Just take extra batteries with you. That's the beauty of that. So I think the beauty is that we can do anything we want electrical wise in these vans. You have 1,000,001 different options of how you want to live and what you want to do, and that's the cool thing about it. So on the far end of my electrical was my water pump. I got a C-Flow water diaphragm water pump. That thing is wonderful. It's quieter than the water pump in this thing. And I showed that I had 2 7-gallon tanks, 1 fresh, 1 gray. That's all I need in that van. I'm not using that thing just to wash hands, brush my teeth, wash dishes, small level. And I'll touch on that when we talk about that later. But like I say, the electrical, $2,700 total cost for my electrical and everything. If you have any questions in my electrical in my van, how I ran cable or anything that I did, message me. Just put a comment down below and let me, you know, shoot the question. I'll be glad to do the best I can to get back to you and let you know what I did. One important thing on my electrical that I didn't do is I didn't bury all my wires behind the wall. The only wiring that went behind the wall was the marine wiring for the ceiling lights, the switch in the wall, and some of the wiring from the Dream lights, and they went up, across, and down those back vents, the back door, and I'll show that sometime. Where I had those vents I talked about, don't cover them up. There's openings where you'll see that marine wire coming down, and if you see wire coming on the bottom, when I showed a video of all my fuse panel, all that marine wire is coming out there. So in the end, I know where it's at, I know where it's coming from, and I have everything labeled, which is the next important thing. Label every wire that you run to and from. Label it at the device and at the origin, at the fuse panel. You want to know every wire you've got, where it's going and what it's doing. If there's anything I've learned about running cable over the years, I worked in telecommunications where I got my ass handed to me on this one. We ran 10 and 20 and 30 and 50, 100 pair of wire running telecommunications wire, punching down on 66 blocks. Whoo, that was a workout. But if you didn't label wire or fan it out and run your pairs in the right order, that's a good ass chewing right there. And it ain't fun trying to go find out that source from end to end when you're toning out, you know. Which is another good thing, is if you want to, if you're running 12 volt on something and you're unsure about a wire, go to your electrical supplier. They have these tone generators. It looks like a little stick, a wand with a point, and the other has, they use them in telecommunications where you can plug it in a phone jack. They're toners, but you have alligator clips which you can run it on each end and you can tone out your signal. You'll hear it from point to other. So it's a continuity check if you're not sure. So but to round this out on the electrical, on the tools that you're going to need that are very important, are simply this: you need a good wire crimp and wire cutters. You need a good wire stripper. You might can get an all-in-one or two of them. Just depends on the choice. Choice is yours, what you want to do. You want to get a good multimeter, and you want to know how to use it. Check continuity for everything that you connect. You need to check the continuity. You really do. You need some good screwdrivers. You don't want to use any impact drills when you're doing the electrical. Just good mid to small size screwdrivers. And you're going to need some electrical tape and some heat shrink tubing. And I may have missed something, but that's the gist of your tools. That's standard electrical stuff. And I'm going to back up because I forgot something. First and foremost in this process, when you're doing your electricity, I don't care what setup you're doing, you need, one, determine where your electrical is going to be. Mine was under the bed. And number two, you need to determine where there's going to be a ground spot. In other words, you need a vehicle, what they call a chassis ground. The battery is grounded to it. It needs to be common to everything that you do, especially if you run a line from your battery, your alternator, back to the house batteries. You don't have to run a ground off of that. You need to run the ground to the charge cord where you're going, to the chassis, to your common ground. So when I talked about that negative bus bar, that's where that main ground is going to, and everything's going to that common ground. So what you'll do is you'll take a square. You can get it at Lowe's. I got it at Lowe's. A dual lug. You'll see it's an electrical lug. It's a ground lug, and you'll find your point on the frame of that vehicle, and you're going to have to scrape the paint off that vehicle. Make sure it's off good. Get the bare metal, and this is where your multimeter comes to play. You're going to need to scrape the paint off of it, and it's not really the easiest thing. I took a screwdriver, but you know, you can probably grind it off with something, maybe a Dremel tool. Scrape it off, get your impact drill and screw in that lug tight to the frame, and then take from the lug and use your meter and move it around. Make sure on that bare spot you've got continuity from that lug to that meter. Put a ground wire on that from the end of that ground wire before you attach anything. Check, make sure you have continuity to the frame of that van. And it's, again, if you're unsure about it, you need to get somebody to help you, because if you do not have a good ground in that vehicle, you can start a fire in your RV or your van. It's important that you know that you have a proper ground in these vehicles. So that's going to be the first thing you do in your electrical process, is determine your ground point, determine where your electricity is going to be. You need to know you have a common ground and know and understand your path of electricity. But anyway, I'm 30 minutes into this deal. I've kind of wanted to brush over the electrical part of things. Hopefully I wasn't babbling, but if you have a question, anything I can clarify, anything I've missed, let me know. I'd be glad to do it. What I'm going to do in time is probably go into, I'm going to review the jackery and the energy and some things I'm using, some devices, and I'll talk about how they wired them, and I will. I'm gonna probably talk about another thing that I wired was my MTI gas detector. That's on the fuse panel as well, and it uses about 1/10 of an amp, and I'll show that. You see them in RVs, and in fact I'll show you right now. I'm just thinking of things I've missed as I go along, but you can see right here it's going to be kind of an upside down ordeal. But you see this thing down here? You see them in RVs all the time. I've got one in my van. It's not just for carbon monoxide, it's other gas detection, propane detection, and everything else. You need one of those towards the floor running, and I mean, I really advise it. A lot of people don't do it, but they really are important. I think I talked about when I was in Salt Lake City, Utah, just north of Salt Lake there. I was staying in a Walmart parking lot, and mine went off, and I pretty much figured out what set it off. And it was rubbing alcohol, spraying the cameras. When the RV forum that I was on told me that anything would set those off, they're sensitive, I knew right then and there they worked. So you want to tie one of those in, and you just run it negative positive to the fuse panel and run a good, I think the fuse that came with it was a 5 amp fuse. The one came with it. Very simple. I'll show stuff like that, these devices that I'm using and how I wired it. I will also show my refrigerator and stuff like that, my appliances, which is another thing. That's a number 5, I forgot. Cigarette lighter plug that I wired was for my refrigerator, for my Alpacool. That was 5, so I did actually 5 of them. So we'll discover that as I go along if I'm missing something else. So I'll show you how I wired that as well. We'll go one by one on a lot of this stuff, a lot of these devices, the microwave, why I picked it and what I did. So anyway, I'm babbling. I'm gonna get off here. Thanks so much for watching, and we will definitely see you on the next video. Thank you so much. Be cool. Bye.